For dessert, I am making my giant almond butter blossoms, which are so satisfyingly chewy and dense, and they've got a whole honkin' chocolate bar in the center. To start on my dough, I'll combine my dry ingredients. I'll get 3.5 cups of all-purpose flour. This is a big batch of big cookies, but Nick needs the energy from planting. And with all the almond butter in the cookies, you know, they're basically a protein bar. 2 teaspoons of baking soda, which will react with the acidity in the brown sugar and just help make these cookies really chewy and kind of crackly. 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, which complement the almond butter really nicely, and 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt. Now I'll get this combined. So these are giant versions of the peanut butter blossoms that my mother-in-law makes with Bernie every year around the holidays. And typically they have those teardrop shaped chocolates in the center, but I'm making them big because I wanted more of the chewy center. And also when you use the chocolate bars versus the teardrop chocolates, I feel like you can get a better ratio of chocolate to cookie in every bite. I love them so much. For the wet ingredients, I'll combine 1 cup of softened unsalted butter, 1 cup of almond butter. And this is unsweetened almond butter, so I can more control the level of the sweetness. I'm adding a lot of sugar already. And then 1 cup each of granulated sugar and light brown sugar, so that you get a little bit of that darker molassesy flavor with the light brown sugar, but it's not overpowering the almond flavor. I'll get this onto my mixer, and then I'll mix this up until it's combined and creamy, but I'm not gonna aerate it too much because in the end, I want this cookie to be extra dense. Now that it's combined, I'll add 2 eggs, 1 at a time. Oops, I added them both. They're still gonna be delicious. And then 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. I'll reduce the mixer to low and then dump in the dry ingredients. And I'll add them in all at once so that I don't risk over mixing some of the dry ingredients and developing gluten and then getting not a great texture in the end. Smells delicious. I'm smelling that cinnamon. Before kids, I was a little bit more loosey-goosey about eating raw eggs and raw flour, and this is the type of dough I could just go to town on. These days, I'm quite a bit more neurotic. The dough is done. I'll set up my shaping station. I've got my baking sheets, which are lined with parchment, and I've got a plate of sugar because I'll roll the cookie dough in the sugar, which will help add more sweetness and a little crunch on the exterior. I've got a 1/4 cup capacity ice cream scoop, which is gonna give you big honkin' cookies. And I'll roll it into a ball and then roll it into the sugar. Place it on a baking sheet. Adorable. I'll keep on scooping and rolling and then bake these at 375 for about 12 minutes until they're golden around the edges. And then it'll be time to give them their chocolate bellies. I'm smelling that cinnamon. They look awesome already. While they're still hot and soft, I've got my chocolate bars here that I'll press right down on top. And I'll give them a firm press so that the edges can crackle all around them just like that. And I'm using classic grocery store waxy milk chocolate here because it just tastes nostalgic to me and I do love the creamy texture. These are looking gorgeous already. These will go back into the oven now for about 2 minutes so that the chocolate can melt slightly and meld with the cookie. I can't wait. This is the hardest part because now I have seen the cookies, I've smelled them. Gotta wait another couple of minutes. That was a rough 2 minutes, but I made it. Now we're talking. All right, while the chocolate is still melty, I'll sprinkle them with toasted almonds because it's pretty, it tastes good with that added crunch. It's time. I'm making my hazelnut Gelt cookies, which are super thick and nutty and topped with sparkly chocolate coins. To get started on my dough, I'll mix up my dry ingredients. And I'll scoop in 1 1/3 cups of hazelnut flour, which is really finely ground hazelnuts. It helps with the structure and moisture of the cookie. And then 3 1/2 cups of all-purpose flour. This is just a variation on my go-to sugar cookie cutout recipe. And I just love it because it stays really nice and thick. Teaspoon of baking powder and 3/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. And I'll whisk this all together. I'll mix up my wet ingredients now. I'll get 1 cup of softened unsalted butter and combine this with 2/3 of a cup of granulated sugar and 2/3 of a cup of powdered sugar. I love the combination of the two. The powdered sugar yields a little bit of a fluffier, softer cookie. I'm adding the zest of 1 orange, and it's just gonna perk these flavors right up. I'll get this onto my stand mixer and beat it until it's light and fluffy. That orange zest smells awesome. I'll crack my eggs and then add them 1 at a time, beating well after each. I'll drizzle in a teaspoon of vanilla. And now I can add my dry ingredients. I'll do this gradually so that they don't go flying everywhere. That hazelnut is really nice. This dough is coming together. The butter smells really good. And now my favorite thing about this cookie recipe, well, other than eating them, is that I don't have to refrigerate the dough before cutting out the shapes. You could if you wanted to. You could get ahead and stick the dough in the refrigerator, but I'm impatient. I just want to eat these really soon. So I'll grab a rolling pin and my baking sheet. I'll dust my counter with a little flour so the dough doesn't stick. Oh, this is such a pretty dough. Ready for this plot. I'll gather it up. Oh yeah, that's nice and soft. Now, my other favorite part about this cookie is that it is destined to be super thick. So I'm rolling this out gently and evenly, and I'll rotate it every so often to ensure that it's not sticking. If it is, I can just dust with a little more flour. To punch out my shapes, I've got a 2 1/2-inch circle cutter, and I'll just cut out my dough. That is the perfect thickness. Look at those clean edges. It's what I like to see in a cookie. I'll just keep punching out my circles and then spacing them 1 inch apart. These cookies look rich. I'll get them in the oven now at 350 degrees for about 12 minutes until they are ever so slightly browned on the bottom. That will ensure that they're still soft in the middle. My cookies are cooling. They smell hazelnutty and amazing, and now I'm ready to make their homemade Gelt hats. I've got some white chocolate chips here that I'll melt in a double boiler, which is a pot of simmering water with a heat-safe bowl on top. It's important to do that with chocolate so that you don't burn it. And I'll just stir this up as it gets melty and smooth. It's already starting to melt. And you can use any kind of chocolate too. Maybe you want to make some extra valuable Gelt and use fancy chocolate. Okay, this is melted and smooth. I'm ready to decorate. So this is so easy. I'm gonna take a teaspoon of chocolate, dollop it in the center of one of my cookies. I'll swirl it around to make a coin. That is 1 valuable piece of chocolate money. And sprinkle on some sprinkles. Ta-da! Just like that. Okay, I'll decorate the rest so we can get our dreidel on. So much funica! All right, I'm going in. They're so soft and hazelnutty. That's my kind of currency. They're chewy and crunchy and salty and sweet. They are perfect for tailgating. I'm gonna start by melting some caramel in my pan. And to help soften it, I'm gonna also add 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. I'm just gonna let these melt and I'm gonna stir it around to get the heavy cream incorporated, and the heavy cream just softens the caramel a little bit. This smells delicious. My caramel is smooth and melted. I'm gonna add my miso paste now. I'm adding 1.5 tablespoons. A little bit goes a long way. And this is gonna add umami, which I like to think of as like 3-dimensional saltiness. It's so good. If you don't wanna go out and get miso paste, you can certainly just add a few good pinches of salt to this caramel. But I love the little something extra that miso adds. Oh gosh, it smells so good. I'm really excited to eat these. All right, I'm going to set the caramel aside to cool slightly, and that'll help me form the sandwiches. So I'll pour it into my bowl. I have my pan lined with parchment, and the parchment is just to help prevent the caramel from sticking. And now I'll grab my crackers. And these treats are the best because they are no bake. They come together so easily. Now I'm gonna arrange my crackers all over my pan. And these salty crackers drive home that salty and sweet combination that I love so much. I am making 6 rows of 6, 36. Okay, now each of these is gonna get a dollop of caramel. I'm using my teaspoon, which will be the perfect amount. I wanna add the most amount of caramel without it going over the edge. And then I'm gonna top it with a cracker. You are gonna be so tasty. Now I'm gonna melt my chocolate. I'm using dark chocolate here so that it's not overly sweet with the caramel, but you can pretty much use any chocolate that you want. And I'm gonna melt it in a double boiler, which is just a bowl set over a pot of boiling water. And I'm gonna stir it as it melts so that it's nice and smooth. This is melted and looking good. So I'm gonna remove it from the heat, and then I'll be ready to dip my cookies into it. I'm gonna dunk each of these halfway into the chocolate and then scrape off any excess and give them a few sprinkles. These are so simple and so good. These cracker cookies are dangerous to have around though, so I'm glad that I have friends coming over to help me eat them. Otherwise, I'll just eat this whole pan. Look how cute it is. So the first thing I'm gonna do is make my sugar cookies. I have 1 cup of softened, unsalted butter here, and I'm gonna add it to my stand mixer. And now I'll add a cup of sugar. And now I'll add 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. I'm gonna cream together the butter and the sugar for a few minutes until light and fluffy. This is pale and fluffy, and now I'm ready for the egg. And I'm gonna crack it into a little bowl first because it's so much easier in case I get a little bit of shell in here to fish it out from this bowl. And then I'll also grab vanilla and almond extract. I'll add 1½ teaspoons of vanilla extract and ½ teaspoon of almond extract. I'm gonna add 3 cups of flour gradually. I don't want it to fly everywhere from the mixer running. And once this first cup of flour is mostly combined, I can add my second cup. The dough is looking great. I'm gonna scrape down the sides to make sure all of the ingredients, like this flour and the butter that's sticking, get incorporated into the dough. I'll dust the top of the dough with flour. And then I'm gonna roll out this dough so that it's about 3/16 of an inch. Don't be afraid to get out your ruler. And now I'll use an offset spatula to transfer the cookies to the cookie sheet. Now, whenever I'm making Linzers, I cut out the top cookies first because once I cut out my stars, I'll use those scraps to then re-roll to make the bottom cookies. So I'm gonna cut stars out right from the center of the cookies. Now I'm gonna re-roll my scraps to cut out the bottom cookie. You never wanna waste cookie dough. And just like the top cookies, I'll roll out this dough until it's 3/16 of an inch thick, and then I'll cut out my bottom circles. They're gonna bake now at 350 for 10 minutes until they're just set, but still pale. They are gonna make the tastiest homemade gifts. I'm gonna let them cool while I make my white chocolate pistachio filling. This filling is beautiful for the holidays. It's sweet and chocolatey, and it's a departure from traditional Linzer jam filling, but I love the way it hardens. It makes these cookies sturdy enough for shipping. I have some white chocolate chips here that I'm gonna melt in my double boiler. And I'll stir it with a spatula as it melts to make sure that it's really smooth and melty. Now I'm gonna tint it with a couple of drops of green food coloring to enhance the color of the pistachios. Oh, that's a perfect pistachio color. And now I'll add ½ cup of finely ground pistachios. I'll grab one of the circle cookies and add a nice plop of the filling right to the center, and then I'll spread it around all the way out to the edge. And then I'll grab one of the star cookies and smush it right on top. And then I'll sprinkle on some of my crushed pistachios. And I have pretty gold stars, perfect for the holidays. Just like that. How adorable. I'll get rolling on the shortbread cookie dough. I put together some flour, sugar, and salt to balance out the sweetness. And I'll stir this around to combine my dry ingredients. Just low. You don't want to get these ingredients flying everywhere. Then I add my vanilla and almond extract. While that's mixing, I'll grab my butter, because you can't have shortbread without butter. I cut the butter into uniform cubes and add them in. And I'm mixing this until all of my mixture comes together to form a dough. Okay, so once we have these nice big clumps here, I can bring it all together with my hands, just like that. I'm gonna divide it into two. I'll wrap these up and stick them in the refrigerator. About 30 minutes is enough, but if you'd like to make this in advance, a day or even 2 days beforehand is just fine. My cookie dough is chilled, and I'm ready to roll out these cookies. It's always a little firm when it comes out of the refrigerator. That's a good arm workout. How's that looking? Looking good. Now to cut these out, I use a round biscuit cutter, and to make them look like store-bought chocolate stripe cookies, I punch out a little circle in the center, and I'm just using a piping tip here. If you don't have a biscuit cutter, you can just use the top of a glass. Once these are all stamped out, I'll go around with my piping tip and stamp out the centers. You have a baby cookie here. Depending on how your cookie salad looks on top, you can tell like which farm you're from. These look great. Okay, let's get these in the oven. I'll pop them in to bake for just about 10 minutes until they're lightly browned around the edges. Looking good. My cookies are cooled and they're ready for the chocolate. Here's how I like to do them. I have a piping bag here with melted chocolate, and if you don't have a piping bag, you can simply use a zip top bag with the corner snipped off. I know that when you find them in the store, they have chocolate on the bottom and stripes on the top. I think that putting the chocolate on the bottom is a little fussy, so I just pipe thick stripes of chocolate on the top. Just enough. I messed this one up, so I have to eat it. I love these little guys. Now I've just gotta make my pudding. I'm gonna add some flour and sugar to my pot. And of course we'll add some salt to balance out that sweetness and make the flavor altogether brighter. And we're gonna add some egg yolks to thicken it. I love the yolks from my chicken eggs. They are so bright and happy. And next I'll add some heavy cream. It's important to do all of this before I turn the heat on my stove, because once the egg yolks get in there, they'll cook pretty quickly. So I want to whisk everything together and make it nice and smooth before we add our heat. And then once we do get our heat on, I'm gonna continue whisking constantly so that we don't end up with scrambled eggs at the bottom of our pot. This will take a few minutes to heat up. See how the whisk is leaving a trail behind? That's how you know it's thick enough. Oh yeah, that's good. Okay, I'm turning off my heat. I'm going to add in vanilla extract and some almond extract. Smells so good. Beautiful. To cool this, I'm gonna scrape it into my bowl and cover my pudding so that the plastic wrap touches the top of the pudding. And this is so that as the pudding cools, it doesn't develop that weird skin on top of it. And now I've just gotta put it all together. First, I'll take out about 1/3 of the cookies for my topping and then bash up the rest. Then I add whipped cream to the pudding mixture to give it a lighter, fluffier texture. I add some drained mandarins, keeping some back for the final decoration. I fold it all in and smooth down the top. I add the cookies and mandarins that I reserved to the top. And I make it a party with some sprinkles, of course. To get started, I'm coarsely chopping some toasted pecans. They smell really good. I'll set them aside and then mix up the dry ingredients for my cookie dough. 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour, 1/2 cup of unsweetened cocoa powder. This is such a nice, simple chocolate cookie dough. And 3/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. I'll give this a quick whisk. This is all mixed up. I'll grab my butter. I've got 1 stick of softened, unsalted butter, 1/4 cup of sugar, and then 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla will complement all these flavors really nicely. And that's it for my ingredients for these cookies. Well, and sprinkles, but we'll get there. And I'll mix this up until it's fluffy. Okay, I'll reduce this to low now and add my dry ingredients. I'll do this gradually so they don't fly everywhere. Okay, my dough has come together. I'll toss in the pecans. I love the texture that these are gonna add. And lastly, I'm gonna dump in some sprinkles because they're gonna look like the cutest pops of color when I slice up the dough. I'll scrape the dough onto my parchment paper. So I'll form this into a log that's 6 inches long. It'll be a nice thick log so that these can be big cookies. Now to get it nice and round, I'm gonna fold the parchment paper over and use my bench scraper to press the parchment paper into a cookie sausage. There you go, nice and even. I'll roll this on up and then pinch the edges like a big piece of candy. I'll just refrigerate this until it's firm, about 2 hours. My dough is nice and cold, but before I slice it, I'm gonna give it a sweet, sugary shell. I'll sprinkle my sugar on the pan and then roll the cookie dough all over to give it a little extra glitz and glam. And I'm done with this. Now I'll slice up my cookies. Oh, look at that pretty cross section. You can see all the nuts and just the right amount of sprinkles poking through to add a pop of color. And after each slice, I like to give it a quarter turn so that it doesn't get too flat on one side. I'll get these onto my cookie sheet spaced evenly apart and then bake at 325 degrees for about 16 minutes until they're no longer shiny and slightly puffed. My chocolate pecan cookies are all baked up. They smell nutty and delicious. I'll let them continue to cool while I make my caramel buttercream. This filling takes these cookies from great to over-the-top fantastic. It's light, it's fluffy, and it just explodes with complexity because of the caramel. And I'm just using store-bought caramel sauce. I'll pour in a 1/4 cup and pop in a stick of softened butter. And I'll mix this up until it's combined and creamy. And then scoop in 1½ cups of powdered sugar and a couple of pinches of salt. I'll mix this up until it's fluffy. It's important to mix it slowly at first so that the powdered sugar doesn't go flying everywhere. I'll plop this into a piping bag, fit it with a round tip. Or you could use a zip top bag with the corner snipped off. Then gently swirl the filling onto 1/2 of the cookies. That buttercream is so smooth. And I'll sandwich on the tops. They're basically like 3-dimensional sugar cookies, and they are so delicious and tons of fun to make. We're gonna be using some of my best baking tips to get you through the Christmas cookie season with minimal stress. So if you're baking along with me, make sure you have the proper tools. Get your oven preheated to 350. Have a baking sheet ready with some parchment paper so that the cookies don't stick. You're gonna want some cookie cutters. This set of nested cookie cutters is perfect because you're gonna want all different sizes. A piping bag fitted with a nice large tip that's round, and a rolling pin or a wine bottle if you don't have a rolling pin, and either a stand mixer or a hand electric mixer. Are you guys ready? Okay, let's do this. So first, grab a medium-sized bowl for all of your dry ingredients. And in this bowl, add 3 cups of all-purpose flour, I always like to mix up my dry ingredients first when I'm baking. It makes the process cleaner. You have less dishes to do because then you can use the same measuring spoons for the wet ingredients. You don't have to wash them off in between. And keep your flour on standby too, because when we roll out the sugar cookies, you're gonna wanna use the flour to dust your work surface so that the cookies don't stick. And when you're measuring out your flour, fluff it up first with your measuring cup to aerate it. That way you won't get too much flour. And then scoop it, pile it in, and level it off with your finger or a knife so that you have exactly 1 cup. Okay. Stick your flour aside, but again, don't let it go too far. And now grab your baking powder. And while I'm at the pantry, I'm also gonna get my vanilla extract and almond extract. Adding baking powder to your cookie dough is gonna help the cookies puff up in the oven, and that's gonna make the texture a little bit softer and fluffier. Add 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder. And 3/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. It's always important to salt your sweets. That brings out all the flavors and it just tastes really good. And now give these dry ingredients a whisk to combine. It's important to get these combined because you do not want to get any large bits of baking powder or salt in a bite. If you've ever bitten into a cookie where the baking powder isn't fully incorporated, it's not fun. This would be an awesome activity for a holiday party. I love hosting cookie decorating parties. Bake all the cookies first and then get tons of frosting and decorations and stick them on the table, and people can just hang out and decorate cookies together and eat the cookies, and it's so much fun. Okay, how are your dry ingredients looking? Are they combined? Good. Grab your big bowl now. We can set this aside. And now add 1 cup of softened unsalted butter to your bowl. This is so much butter on this plate. This is for the frosting. And to this bowl, add 1 cup of sugar. And now grab your hand mixer and beat the butter and the sugar together until it's pale and fluffy. This will take a couple minutes. Every so often, you can stop and use your rubber spatula to scrape down the sides, and that's to make sure that all of the butter and the sugar gets incorporated. This cookie dough is just a basic sugar cookie dough. You can use this for any kind of cutout, even sandwich cookies or Linzer cookies. It's really delicious and super easy to make. Now, once your mixture is looking nice and fluffy, grab your egg. And crack your egg right in. And then also add 1½ teaspoons of vanilla extract. And then ½ teaspoon of almond extract. Now, I love the flavor of almond extract. I could have it in every single thing and not get sick of it. Oh, it smells so good. If you're not wild about it, just use vanilla, that's fine. Now mix this until the egg and the extracts have combined into the butter and sugar. And now it's time to add our dry ingredients. So gradually add the flour mixture. Do it in batches just to make sure that it doesn't go flying everywhere in the kitchen. So add about 1/3 of it first, and now we'll mix that in. And start your mixer on low. If you put it on too high right off the bat, flour will be flying everywhere in your kitchen, and you don't want that. And once all the flour is combined, or most of it at least, you can add another 1/3 of the flour mixture. And again, mix it in. Can you smell that vanilla? It smells so good. I love sugar cookies, especially around the holidays. I like them even more than gingerbread cookies. Add the rest of your dry ingredients. And now mix this in. How is your dough looking? Okay, if it's looking crumbly, that's how it should look. Once everything is combined, I want you to stop your mixer, and then you can just use your hands to bring everything together into a dough. Doesn't it feel so nice and soft? Now, once your dough has come together like this, you can lose your big bowl. And now divide it in half. And that's because we're only really gonna be working with half of the dough at once, and you wanna keep the other half cold. You don't want it to overheat, otherwise it's gonna be difficult to work with and cut out into your shapes. And if you wanted to prep this dough ahead of time, like 1 or 2 days, you could wrap it all in plastic wrap and keep it in the refrigerator. But right now, we're gonna be working with half, so keep half of it on your counter and grab some plastic wrap for the other half. So pat this out into a disc. It'll make it easier to roll out when the time comes to roll it out. And grab a piece of plastic wrap and wrap it tightly so that no air can get in. And now you can stick this in the refrigerator for later. So clear your work surface, sprinkle it with a little bit of flour so that the dough doesn't stick. And then you can also sprinkle the top with a little flour too. Pat it out, and then grab your rolling pin and roll it out until it's flat and about 1/4 inch thick. And the way that I like to roll it out is I'm using the weight of the rolling pin, and every so often I'm gonna rotate it just so that I'm making sure that it doesn't stick to the work surface, and also to ensure that I'm rolling it out evenly. How are you guys doing with your dough? Isn't this a fun, satisfying process? I love working with cookie dough. It's like working with clay. We're ready to cut out our circles. This dough is gonna be enough to do 2 of each of my different sizes of cookie cutters. So I'm gonna place my cookie cutter right up against the edge of the dough so that I can get the maximum amount of cookies. I'm going all the way around the edge, making sure to have minimal dough scraps. The less times that we re-roll the scraps, the better the texture of the cookies will be. If you overwork your dough, they might get a little tough. And if you don't have circles, you can use squares, you can use stars for this. You can really cut out any shapes that you want. Now, once you're done cutting out your shapes, grab an offset spatula. If you don't have a small offset spatula, just the smallest spatula that you have, or even a butter knife, and use that to get underneath the cookie and then transfer it to a parchment-lined baking sheet. And when you're placing these on the baking sheet, allow at least 1 inch in between them, because that's gonna allow the cookies to bake evenly on all sides. Now these are ready to bake. Bake them at 350 for about 8 to 10 minutes until they're lightly golden around the edges. And while these bake, let's just clean up and then make our frosting. This frosting is a classic American buttercream. It is so easy to make, and it's really rich and sweet. You ready? So grab the remaining softened butter and add that to your big bowl, and then also add 2 cups of powdered sugar. This is really the type of thing that you could just eyeball because it does not have to be exact. Now slowly turn on your mixer. Once the powdered sugar starts to incorporate into the butter, you can increase the speed. Once this is going, you can add a pinch of kosher salt, and this will help bring out all the flavors and just balance out that sweetness. I started making these a few years ago. I was going through a phase of making mini cakes all the time. Itsy bitsy cute little layer cakes. And then one day I started making the layers out of cookies, and they were so much fun. They were really stable, and they were great for cookie swaps, and you actually get 5 cookies in one. So now they've become a tradition. And you can increase the speed. Once your frosting is looking smooth and creamy, you can add your vanilla and a little almond if you want. I'll add my vanilla, and then a little bit of almond. And those two flavors together are so delicious. And to me, they just scream holidays. Also grab some heavy cream. Heavy cream is gonna bring everything together and smooth it out and make the texture so much creamier. I'm gonna add a couple of tablespoons. And again, this is something that can be eyeballed too. And now I'll mix this all to combine. And if you don't have heavy cream, you can also use a tablespoon or two of whole milk. Now lastly, add your food coloring. We should use green because it's Christmas trees, and I like using this mossy green color. Add a few drops. You can always add more, but it's difficult to take away, so start with a little and then add more until you get the color that you want. How is your frosting looking? Are you smelling your cookies yet? Let's check on them. These are perfect. They are set. They're still pale, so I know they're gonna be a little soft. Okay, I'm gonna let these cool while I finish up my frosting. Now grab your piping bag that's fitted with the tip. And if you don't have a piping bag, you can use a zip top bag with the corner snipped off. Fold the sides down. And I always find it easiest to put it in a big cup or a big measuring cup like this. And that way you'll have both hands free to fill your bag. And grab your spatula and scrape all the frosting into the piping bag. Just plop it right in. We can lose the food coloring and the extracts too. Whenever I'm decorating, I like to have a clean surface. I don't want to have any distractions. Now, grab some serving plates, or I'm gonna use cute little cake stands. Aren't these adorable? Extra special for the holidays. Grab your decorations, so some sprinkles or candies. We are ready to assemble. So fold up the top of your piping bag and smush all the frosting down toward the tip. And as you're doing so, give the top a twist so that the frosting doesn't come out the other end. Add a little pop of frosting to your cake stands so that the cookies don't move around. This is gonna act as your glue. Grab the biggest cookies, stick them down. And then add a layer of frosting. A nice thick layer of frosting. And then smush on the next biggest cookie. Like that. And now do it with the remaining cookies. Just like that. These are going to be really big cookie cakes. Delicious. We'll go right on top. And the last layer of our little cartoon Christmas trees. And then you can finish with a layer of frosting. And then, of course, sprinkles to decorate. Oh, we should use a yellow ball to act as the star of the tree. Yeah. Oh, do you guys all have sprinkle tweezers in the kitchen? You should. It'll help with this. And just decorate your Christmas trees however you want. Have fun with it. How cute are these? They look just like little cartoon Christmas trees. Okay, I'm gonna taste one. They're soft and sweet, and the frosting has the perfect amount of almond in it. This is just how a Christmas cookie should taste. Okay, sorry, Santa. I'm not saving any for you. To get started, I'm gonna make up my cookie batter. I'm gonna combine 3 cups of all-purpose flour, and then 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and a teaspoon of kosher salt. My dry is combined. I'll get 3/4 cup of butter in my mixing bowl, and I'll add 1.5 cups of sugar. And now one thing that every black and white cookie needs is a little bit of lemon flavor. It plays so nicely with the vanilla, so I'll add the zest of half of a lemon. I'll get this onto the mixer and beat it until it's fluffy. While this mixes, I'll grab 3 eggs and some yogurt to tie everything together. And I'm gonna add my eggs one at a time, making sure each one is fully incorporated before adding the next. The batter's looking beautiful already. I'm gonna add a tablespoon of vanilla extract, and now I'm gonna add the dry ingredients, alternating with 3/4 cup of whole milk yogurt. I'm gonna reduce the mixer to low, and then I'm gonna add 1/3 of the dry ingredients, followed by 1/3 of the yogurt, and the next third, and the next third, and the next third. So once this dry ingredients batch is mostly mixed in, I'm gonna add 1/4 cup of yogurt. This is whole milk plain yogurt, not Greek yogurt. This is just about fully mixed. I'm gonna turn the mixer off, and now I'm ready to scoop. I've got a couple of baking sheets lined with parchment so that the cookies don't stick. And then I'm gonna grab my ice cream scoop, which I love to use for these, and I'll add a scoop right onto my baking sheet, just like that. A perfectly round plop is what I like to see. And then I'm gonna keep on scooping. These are gonna go in the oven now at 350 degrees for 14 to 16 minutes until the bottoms are just starting to turn brown. My cookies are ready to come out of the oven. Oh, these smell heavenly. These look so good and perfectly puffy. I'm gonna let these cool now while I whip up my dueling glazes. These are kind of like the hip younger sibling to the traditional black and white cookie. So 2 glazes, 2 bowls. They're both gonna start with 1.5 cups of powdered sugar, a pinch of salt. I like to add a tablespoon of light corn syrup. And then some of my whole milk yogurt is gonna bring the glaze together. And it'll add more of that tanginess. I'm gonna start with 3 tablespoons of yogurt. This type of glaze is really all about fine-tuning the consistency. Now for the pink glaze, I'm gonna blend up 1/4 cup of freeze-dried strawberries. I'll blend these until a very fine powder. Oh yeah, strawberries smoke. I'll pour this right into one of the bowls. And then for the chocolate glaze, I'll add 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. And I'll mix them until they're smooth. I'm obsessed with the natural pink color that the strawberries add. That's the consistency that I'm looking for. It's thick, but still spreadable. Let me mix up the chocolate glaze now. This chocolate looks great. It's glossy and thick. It's time for the best part, the decorating. So I'll take a little of my strawberry glaze and then smooth it over 1/2 of the cookie. And for this lighter glaze, it's okay to go a little bit past that equator line because the chocolate can go over it. And that's actually the best bite, when you get a bite with both glazes layered on the cookie. Oh, for doubly cute. I'll keep on prettying these up. Dun, dun, dun. I've gotta try one immediately. I love these, they're so dense and cakey. I'll combine 2¼ cups of all-purpose flour. Half a teaspoon of baking powder will help these get fluffy. And then 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm gonna grate in some fresh nutmeg. I'll whisk this to combine. I've got 1 3/4 stick of unsalted butter that's softened, and I'll combine it with 3/4 cup of sugar. I'll get this beating and let it cream together for a few minutes. And in the meantime, I'll crack an egg. I'll add this right in. I've gotta have vanilla in my sugar cookies. And then add the dry ingredients gradually so that they don't go flying everywhere. While this finishes up mixing, I'll grab my food coloring and cat cookie cutters. Okay, my dough looks great. I'm gonna remove a little bit less than half of it. One part I'm gonna dye orange for the cat faces, and then the other I'm gonna add some green food coloring to, and that'll be the border. And I'll mix this in until the color is evenly dispersed. Okay, I'll just wrap this up. I'm gonna stick this in the fridge just so that it can firm up a little bit. And now with my remaining dough, I'm gonna flavor it with some orange zest. I'll just plop this right on top. And now I'm gonna glove up because I'm gonna knead in some orange food coloring. But I don't wanna mix it in fully. I want it to be marbly because it'll look more accurately like Sven. Sven's my favorite cat. Keep on folding it and smushing it until it gets to be the look that I'm going for. Okay, this is perfect. I'll grab my rolling pin and some bench flour. I'm gonna roll out the dough until it's quite thick, 1/2 inch. And then I'll get to work cutting out my cats. Okay, just like that. Look at that cute little kitty. I'll keep on cutting these out. Okay, I've got my litter of kitties, and now I'm gonna stack them up on top of each other. I'll use a little water as glue. Then I'm gonna have this log of kitty. I'll wrap it in green cookie dough, and then when I slice them, will be a beautiful cross section with a kitty face. I've got my kitty columns, and they're good and frozen. I wanna wrap them in my green cookie dough, so I'll unwrap my green dough, and I'll cut off a little piece, and I'll roll it into a long skinny snake, and I'll place it right on top of the cats. And then I'll keep on going all the way around. Okay, now that the cats are completely covered in green, I'll give it a very gentle roll to smooth it out. I'll trim off the ends. You can already see the cat. If you can believe it, I'm gonna roll these in sprinkles. And then I'll give him another gentle roll. I'll keep rolling, and then I'm gonna wrap these up and stick them in the fridge to chill so they're nice and firm when I slice and bake them. To finish these off, I'll slice into 1/4 inch pieces and bake at 350 degrees for 10 to 12 minutes. I'm getting these cookies out of the oven. I can't wait any longer. They're indistinguishable from Sven. All right, let me taste. Hi. They're sweet, a little orangey. I'm making my monster cookie bars, which are thick and chewy, basically a junkier granola bar. To get started, I'm gonna melt a stick of butter, and I'm gonna melt this over low. I'm gonna add 3/4 of a cup of unsweetened peanut butter to my bowl. I like to buy the kind that just has peanuts because I am gonna be adding a bunch of sugar. I'm gonna add 1/2 cup of granulated sugar and then 2/3 of a cup of light brown sugar. That hint of molasses flavor goes so nicely with peanut butter. I'll add a teaspoon of cinnamon. I think of cinnamon to peanut butter the same way that I think of espresso to chocolate. It just brings out its natural tastiness and coziness. A couple of teaspoons of vanilla. I love that flavor. And 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. I'll check on my butter. This is all melted. I'll add this right in. And I'll whisk this together. Okay, this is combined. I'm gonna add 3 eggs now, 1 at a time. Monster cookies are a classic Midwest dessert. They were invented in Michigan, and they've gotta have peanut butter, oats, and candy-coated chocolates. So 3 of the best things. And I like monstering all sorts of desserts. Monster cookie dough, monster granola would be so good. Monster everything. I'll sprinkle in some shredded coconut. It's non-traditional, but I dig it. And some roasted peanuts. This just adds great crunch. I'll get these incorporated. There's no flour in monster cookies, so I'm gonna add 3.5 cups of quick cooking oats. I've got my baking soda, and I'm gonna sprinkle 1 teaspoon evenly all over the oats. I'll mix the baking soda in with the oats so that it can incorporate evenly, and then I'll fold it in with the rest of the batter mixture. I love thick desserts, especially when they're extra gooey. Okay, I always like to add my candy-coated chocolates last so that their color doesn't bleed. So I'll sprinkle in a cup. I'll quickly fold these in. I've got a 9x9 square pan, and it's greased and lined with parchment with wings, which will help me get the baked bars out. And I'll just dump my dough right in. I'll pat it out evenly, all the way to the edge. I love these pans that have perfect 90-degree corners. So satisfying. If you like a hilly landscape, you could just leave it, but I live in the flatlands, so I'm gonna take a piece of parchment paper, put it on top, and give it a good pat so that it's extra flat. Feels as flat as the farmland out the window. Looks good. I'll top with a few more chocolates. Every bite is going to get some chocolate on top. These are gonna bake at 350 degrees for 28 minutes until brown around the edges. Take cover. There's about to be a monster invasion in here. These smell awesome. I'm gonna let these cool and then I'll slice them up. Ooh, it's still slightly warm. Here I go.